man, I really gotta get that fixed. Grand Cook, Bruce Wayne. You said that like it explains why there's a total stranger sitting in the dark in my second favorite chair. Grant, I'm putting together a... Wait. Second favorite chair? Oh, what's your first? We don't have to talk about that. Ugh. Told ya. Look, man, I don't know who you are, but whoever you're looking for... So you're fast. Yeah, well that's a... Hold on a sec. This is plastic. Of course it is. I'm not gonna throw something deadly at you. I mean, what if I was wrong? I'm not a complete f***ing retard. That totally makes sense. Exactly. Like, crazy, huh? Hey guys, welcome to Film Learnin, the show dedicated to learn you some filmmaking and learn you good. And finally, after weeks of teasing, the Justice League effect is here. I really do want to thank you all for being so patient with this one. As you can see from the runtime below, this is officially the longest Film Learnin episode I've ever made in all 4 seasons.
My God.
My God, indeed. Now gang, there's been so many requests for this effect, if I listed all of you, it would take up the entire episode. So let's just jump into it, shall we?
Thank you, Jesus!
First off, we have a new Justice League Strike Pack that contains everything you'll need to complete this effect. So before you do anything else, stop what you're doing, download that down in the description, and let's get to work, shall we? Okay guys, we have a few things to check off before we can get started on this effect, as it's not a hard effect to pull off per se, but it has a crap load of steps. So step 1, download the Strike 2 Justice League pack and unzip it. Within the pack you have the Batarang Photoshop sequences, the Strike Lightning sequences, the sound effects file, the instructions PDF, and some stills and guides to help you with shot composition. Now guys, be sure and read the instructions before starting on this tutorial. It's going to save you a lot of headaches as I'm only going through layering and compositing the effect. I won't be showing you the comp settings for each shot as the compositions themselves are already ready to go. So in order to complete this effect, you can do one of 2 things, gang. You can shoot your actor on a green screen in each of the 4 shots we have to work on, or you can shoot your actor against a background and rotoscope them out. In both instances, I would recommend shooting a background plate just in case the blurring effects we use show the edges of your rotoscoping. As for me, I shot all mine on a green screen, not only because I'm throwing a batarang at myself via compositing, but mostly because I hate rotoscoping, and shooting on a green screen is way easier and far less time consuming. One last thing though, in the shots where time slows down and our normal speed flash actor is dodging the batarang from a slowed down Bruce Wayne, you have 2 options here. If you have a camera capable of slow motion, shoot this as slow as you can. If you don't, you can just act in slow motion and then slow that footage down using After Effects' time stretch option, or use a third-party plugin like Twixtor. So guys, as I mentioned before, we have 4 different shots to work on, but in reality, there's 6 different effect shots in the teaser. The other 2 are these shots right here, the one where the batarang flies from Bruce's hand like so, and of course, the batarang entering the frame in the next shot. The first one you might be able to pull off in camera, if you have a batarang handy, but for those of us who don't, I actually used an older tutorial to pull this off, mainly my arrow tutorial. Basically, I animated a still of the batarang spinning, pre-composed it, dropped it into the comp, made it 3D, positioned it into place, and then animated it moving out of the frame in 3D space. You can check out that tutorial right here and down in the description. The second shot is super easy. All you have to do is drop the before slowdown batarang sequence in a comp, add your video of your actor reacting to it below that, add a camera lens blur onto the batarang, color correct it to match your scene, and that's it. If you feel the need, you can also animate the blur amount to get lower as the shot ends, but that's up to you. Now, let's move on to the cool stuff. So guys, the first shot I want to focus on is the Batarang Dodge. I've got my comp set up and ready to go. As you can see, my actor's been keyed out. Let's just turn him on and off. You can also see that my Bruce Wayne is moving in slow motion. I shot this background plate at 96 frames per second, but I did know that that wouldn't be slow enough, so I also acted in slow motion as well. So the first thing we're going to do is rack focus when I start to move out of the way. This means changing our focus point from Bruce right here to me. So let's select both layers, head up to Effect, Blur and Sharpen and add Camera Lens Blur. Let's zero out both layers to start with. There we go. From there, I need to blur out my flash actor at the front, so I'll crank the amount up to 20. Now, since I'm working with 4K footage, you'll have to play around to find your sweet spot, as 20 might be a bit too blurry for you. Next, let's scrub along the timeline until I start to move, right here. From there, I'll add a keyframe to the blur amount on my background plate and my actor. Now, since I want a nice smooth focus change, I'm going to scrub forward 12 frames and then zero out the blur amount on my actor, and then crank up the blur amount on my background plate. I think 6 looks pretty good. Now remember, we also have to check repeat edge pixels, otherwise we'll get some vignetting around the frame. I'll then highlight both keyframes on the actor layer, right click, head to Keyframe Assistant and add Easy Ease. This way the focus rack is even smoother. Rinse and repeat these steps for the background plate too, and that part is done. As you can see, we now rack focus between the two actors.
Nice.
From there, let's add the lightning. As you can see, I've imported the strike folders into the project window. Let's grab the Lightning 01 sequence and drop it below our actor footage and change the transfer mode to screen. If you'd like the lightning to be a little bit brighter, just duplicate that bad boy. Next, we'll scale it down to fit the frame. About 80% should do. Now, time to add the Batarang. So I'll grab side front on and drop it under my actor footage. From there, depending on your actor's position in the frame, you may have to alter the position of the Batarang like so. We'll then hit P, we'll then hit the stopwatch, head to the end of the comp and make sure our Batarang layer ends the shot lined back up with the frame. There we go. And if we preview it, it's looking pretty good. Be aware you may have to color correct the Batarang to suit your shot. Since this is only a tutorial, I'm going to flash forward to it already done with a zany sound effect. There we go. Next step, adding some displacement. So this first displacement layer, yes there are 3, is showing that initial burst of energy that ripples from our actor as he taps into the speed force. So to do that, we need to add a new adjustment layer, and then plop that under our actor layer. We'll then head up to Effect, Distort and add us some Turbulent Displace. Next, set the displacement to bulge, the amount to 0, the size to 100. We'll then scrub along the timeline to when our actor starts to move back. Hit the stopwatch, we'll then skip ahead 1 frame, crank the amount to 17. Scrub along the timeline until the actor has moved back completely, and then up that amount once again to 50. We'll then head on back to the first frame of our animation, grab the pen tool, and draw a mask in the shape of a big old fat C. From there, we'll hit F and feather it out around 85 pixels. And lastly, we'll collapse the mask settings down, hit the stopwatch on mask path, and then we'll animate the mask path to move out of frame in line with the actor's movements, like so. If we check out a preview, you can see a ripple effect as our actor moves back. Nice, huh? Next, displacement layer. This layer is yet another ripple that occurs, but this time it goes in the opposite direction and is a little more subtle. So let's add a new adjustment layer, add it under our actor layer and get started. Once again, head to Effect, Distort and add Turbulent Displacement. Only this time, we'll keep the displacement on Turbulent, the amount to 20 and the size to 42. We'll then head to the start of the comp, hit the stopwatch on Evolution, head right to the end and crank it up to 2. From there, let's draw a nice big wave shape using the pen tool like so. We'll then hit F and feather it out around 100 pixels. We'll then, just like with our last layer, collapse those mask settings down and hit the stopwatch on mask path. We'll then move that mask completely off screen down in the corner below our actor. From there, let's scrub along the timeline to the point where our actor is completely moved back, add another keyframe to our mask path, then skip ahead around 20 to 25 frames and move that mask in the opposite direction completely off screen. This will create a different type of ripple, and if we check out a quick preview, you can see how it works. I told you this one had a lot of steps. Our last displacement layer will follow the lightning that darts across the frame here and here. So guess what? We're going to add one more adjustment layer. Shocking, right? Once again, head to Effect, Distort and add Turbulent Displacement. This time we'll keep the displacement on Turbulent, the amount to 71, the size to 33. We'll then head up to the start of the comp, hit the stopwatch on Evolution, head right to the end and crank it up to 2. From there, let's draw a noodle shape using the pen tool like so. If you want to bring the lightning on screen and trace that shape, that's cool too. We'll then hit F and feather it out around 100 pixels. We'll then, just like with our last layer, we'll then head up to the start of the comp and hit the stopwatch on Mask Path. We'll then move that mask completely off screen. We'll then scrub along the timeline until we find that point just before our lightning is about to dart off the screen and add another keyframe. We'll then animate the mask moving with the lightning layer. It should only take a couple of frames to do. And of course, when that lightning's off screen, add another keyframe. And then we'll rinse and repeat these steps for the next pass of lightning. Drag the mask back into position and then animate it frame by frame following our lightning. Whew, now we're done with that. From there, it's time to add some colouring, or Zack Snydering I guess. Let's head up, add a new adjustment layer, and then plop that under our actor layer. We'll then head to Effect, Color Correction, and add Photo Filter. We'll change the filter type to Custom and make it a baby blue. We'll then set the density to 100. Head to the point just before our actor moves, hit T to bring up opacity on our adjustment layer, hit the stopwatch and crank it down to 0. Skip ahead around 10 frames and crank that bad boy back up to 100. Let's now head back to the original point right here, just before our flash actor moves, and let's copy and paste the photo filter on him. Only this time, we're going to crank that density down to 0, hit the stopwatch, and then we'll move ahead those 10 frames and up the density to around 60%, as we want our actor to still pop from the background, but still have similar colouring. Next step, let's add that Speed Force blurring. Add yet another new adjustment layer and pop it under our actor layer. We'll then head to Effect, Blur and Sharpen and add CC Radial Fast Blur. Next, let's pop that center point on our actor, like so. Set it to brightest and crank the amount to 0. We'll then head to the point on the timeline where the actor is completely moved back and hit the stopwatch on a mount. We'll then skip ahead 1 frame and crank it to around 40. Now I know that might look weird now, but with our next step, we're going to make it a little weirder. We're going to do something that I didn't do in the teaser, and that's add a little Rgb split to the background layer. You guys did suggest this in the comments of the teaser, and you were right, so let's do it. Now guys, I'm totally going to cheat here and use a plugin from Red Giant Universe called Rgb Displacement, but if you don't have Universe, I'm going to have a link to my friend and 30k short film comp winner Ruben's VHS tutorial, which covers how to do an Rgb split very easy with no plugins. So a big thanks to Ruben for taking the load off my shoulders and doing the hard work. The link is in the description. So guys, all I'm going to do with the Rgb displacement is just set a keyframe at the same point of our photo filter, set it to 0, and then go ahead 1 frame and crank it up to 6. It gives a subtle Rgb displacement and it's not overpowering. Speaking of overpowering, let's add some exposure. So let's add yet another new adjustment layer. Once again, pop it under our actor layer. Guys, before we continue, let's open up our guide folder here in the project window and grab exposure BG1 and drop that on top of our timeline. Now this is handy because it pops up a little prompt to when we need to animate our exposure. So we'll head to Effect, Color Correction and add exposure to that adjustment layer. We'll then scrub along the timeline and just as the actor's done moving back, you'll see our first prompt from our guide and we'll hit the stopwatch on exposure. And from there, it's simply a point of following the guide to when you add keyframes and crank the exposure up like so. Now guys, this point here where it says 2.95 high, this is actually the transition point between our Rgb split and our radial blur not being on screen and them to actually being on screen. So if you need to, we'll just adjust those keyframes to actually match this point here. There we go. Now that that's synced up, it'll be an easy thing just to follow the guide for the rest of the shot. When you're done, feel free to delete the guide and add the next one called Actor Guide. Select your actor layer, head to Effect and add exposure to the actor layer. Once again, hit the stopwatch on exposure and follow the guide just like with our last layer to add the keyframes on screen right now. Once we're done, your shot will look like this. Holy crap, that took a long time to explain. And that was the first shot. Now, as crazy as it seems, we ain't quite done yet. If you head to the project window, you'll see a folder called Flare 01. Let's just drag and drop that Photoshop sequence on top of everything and change the transfer mode to screen. All this is an optical flares layer that's just meant to simulate that light burst that comes out of the corner in the trailer. I've simply rendered it out as a Photoshop sequence so everyone from CS4 onwards can use it. Now guys, as far as the other shots are concerned, they aren't nearly as complex. Let's take a quick look at our next shot. As you can see, it's me in the slider shot moving left to right. You can see it's keyed out and ready to go. So let's start with the basics. Let's firstly add our lightning under our actor layer just like before. This time we're using lightning 02 and we're changing the transfer mode to screen. Next, add the Batarang. This time the Batarang sequence is called Face On. We'll then head up to Effect, Blur and Sharpen and add a camera lens blur to the Batarang layer. Just bump up the amount to a point where it looks good to you. That looks pretty good to me. We'll then hit P and animate its position to move from left to right, like so. Just like with before, all very easy. We'll then add our photo filter to both layers. You can copy and paste this if you like from our previous comp, but make sure you hit T, hit the stopwatch to cancel our previous animation, and turn that opacity back up to 100. Just be sure and lower the density back down on your actor layer to about 60%, like so. Oh, and don't forget to put it on the Batarang layer too, because it's on top of all of our other stuff. From there, we'll add our Radial fast blur just like in our previous shot. So let's cheat and just copy that adjustment layer from our previous comp right here, head back to the shot we're working on and pop it down. Once again, hitting that stopwatch to remove the previous animation. We'll then do the same with the Rgb Split, just copy and paste that straight on in. And of course, we'll follow that up with adding our exposure effect. Only this time, we're going to change it up and just add an adjustment layer, head to Effect, Color Correction and add Exposure. We'll then crank it up to say 0.52. And then I'll adjust the gamma to 1.34. Once again, these settings will be different based on your shot, so be sure and have a play. And guess what? Instead of adjusting these settings throughout the comp, we're just going to hit T, hit the stopwatch on opacity, and simply keyframe the exposure to become visible whenever the lightning's on screen. So for example, scrub along until we see some lightning, add a keyframe right there, and as the lightning fades out in this shot, we'll scrub along the timeline until that lightning fades completely and turn the opacity back down to 0 once more. That way we get a flash of light and then it fades in conjunction with the lightning fading. Then we'll simply rinse and repeat this for the rest of the shot. I did the exposure differently on this shot and the next because the lightning behaves a little differently and flashes on screen and then fades from view. Now as you can see, what I'm doing, and you can do it as well, is I'm adjusting the opacity based on the amount of lightning in the shot. Say there's only a little bit on the side, I'm only cranking it up to say 40 to 60% and then fading it back down. When there's a big flash of lightning, I'm cranking it up to 100. But as I always say, just have a play with these settings and make it your own. Now one thing you can do as a cherry on top gang is add a couple of instances of light rays. For example, if you have a look at the shot on screen right now, you can see I have a couple of points where the lightning pops out more than usual. To do this, all we have to do is add an adjustment layer on top of everything, trim that layer to when we want it to start, this'll do. Head to Effect, Generate and add light rays. You can then scrub along the timeline to a point where you'd like to add the light rays, say here, move it into position, maybe up the intensity if you want, and then hit the stopwatch on intensity. You can then jump back one frame and turn it down to 0. jump forward say 2 frames, and then bump it back down to 0 again. You can then follow that up by trimming the end of it just to make it a little bit neater, and of course, make it easier to copy, which is our next step. Just find some more points where you want to enhance the lightning, just copy, move it into position, and change the center point. It's that easy. You can then add a light burst to any point in the scene. And if we check out a preview, looks pretty cool. Now guys, this episode is already running quite long, so I'm gonna skip this next shot as it incorporates everything I've just shown you now. So just follow along the same steps and make sure you read the instructions on how to assemble the comp. All of the lightning layers and the batarang layers are included. Which brings us to the final shot, the catch. Now this shot is not really that different to our opening shot. As you can see, we have a rack focus effect once more as our actor looks from the background around to the batarang in front of him. We then have our radial blur, we have our Rgb split, our lightning layer, our exposure effect, and our photo filter. And if you see here, we have a couple of turbulent displacement layers in the shot. We'll just go over those quickly, but the main difference is the shot right here, when our actor reaches for the batarang, catching it. Now guys, you can do this in one of 2 ways. You can have the actor actually catch it, or you can simply cut a frame or 2 just before they catch it like I did in the teaser. As you can see in the actual shot, I do actually grab the batarang, but I think it works better in the final shot if you just imply that I caught it. Having said that, it is a pretty easy thing to do. You just have your actor pretend to catch the batarang like so. And what we'll do is just animate the position and the rotation of the batarang for a few frames following your actor's hand. So let's head to the point just as our actor goes to grab it, highlight our batarang layer, hit P, hit the stopwatch on position, hit R, hit the stopwatch on rotation, and let's just switch between the 2 and adjust the batarang for a few frames to simulate it being caught. Now guys, on the first keyframe of both the animation on position and rotation, I'm going to right click on that first keyframe and add toggle hold keyframe. This will stop After Effects from anticipating the movement and starting to move the actual layer before we want it to move. We'll then turn on motion blur for the comp and the batarang layer and check out a preview. Looks pretty good to me. Now guys, I'm just going to go back to those turbulent displacement layers for this shot just really quickly. The first one here just follows the lightning strike as it goes from one part of the screen to the next. I've already shown you how to do that one, so it's pretty easy, just follow the exact same steps. And the second one is just completely static, but affects the area around one of the lightning strikes. So to do that, we'll just head up, add a new adjustment layer, add turbulent displacement, and we're going to draw a quick mask around that lightning layer. From there, let's skip a couple of frames back before the lightning strikes, hit the stopwatch on amount and evolution, then we'll skip ahead say 2 frames, crank the amount up to 7, then we'll skip ahead around 12 frames and turn the amount down to 0, and then set the evolution to 1. We'll then hit F and feather it out around 100 pixels. And if we check out our preview, you can see we've got a nice bit of warping around that lightning strike. And that, my friends, I am so glad to say, is a massive tutorial done. Add up all those steps, edit all of those shots together, and you'll get something like this. So guys, that's my take on the Justice League flash effect. I know it's missing the slow motion sparks, but to me that's just a personal preference, since in my shots there wasn't anything that could really spark up. So feel free and add them if you like. But all in all, we've recreated a scene from a $200 million movie on a 5-year-old home PC in 20 minutes. And that to me is pretty cool. Once again guys, thank you so much for watching. We have more tutorials on the way, so be sure and subscribe right there if you haven't already. If you enjoyed the video, please do me a favor and like and share the hell out of it. I worked my ass off on this one and I'd really appreciate the love. As always, my social media are up there to stay up to date. And until next time, keep learning.